you were about to ask a question, make a comment.
Yep, and I'm writing it. Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah. So we started. We're back on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mayor. So, a couple things, a couple points I wanted to make. One was, as a commissioner who helped to select the James Cornerfield group, I can tell you that much deliberation was given and talked about regarding community involvement. And I appreciate all the commissioners and Commissioner Schoaf, your comment around ensuring that that process is fed throughout. Again, as one of the commissioners who was on this commission and helped to bring them on, there are a couple things that was apparent to me. First of all, they were, in my opinion, head and shoulders above anyone else that responded, and community involvement and engagement was paramount to both them being chosen and the understanding. They left West Palm Beach heading back to New York and other parts of the country, understanding very clearly that the community involvement was going to be important. I'm supportive of continuing to kick this can, understanding that what I think Mr. Ward is coming back to us is simply a framework, so almost the parameters and very clear understanding that this is the next step, but doesn't continue to move forward without the community involvement. And as I think about framework, whether it was this group or whether it was another group, this just seems like the logical next step for me. And so, again, because it was 3 hours ago when I started to make this initial comment, I think my comment would be I'm supportive of moving this forward, given some of the highlights that we talked about, which was, again, we've set up not a finite amount, or not a definite amount, but an understanding of what our parameters and framework are around the budget, if you will, to Mayor's point, and I totally agree, you know, obviously making that come to fruition sooner rather than later, understanding what that would look like. But I'm clear that this is just a framework and that nothing happens without the community input and involvement. So as best I could piecemeal that comment, that's what I thought I was going to say 3 hours ago.
Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess it all depends on how detailed this framework is going to be. Is it literally a bare bones just structure, or are they going to be talking about specifics of directions for this project? You know, in that case, it probably would be prudent to wait until we had some, you know, community input if they're going to be, you know, putting together anything more than the bare bones framework, I would think. That's all I have.
Mayor, Commissioner, if I could, pardon me, they've got in their letter of engagement a fairly clear scope and deliverables, Commissioner, and the kinds of things that they're going to be defining are going to be fairly broad-brushed kinds of issues. As I indicated, what do we do with the parking, the entrances to the park, those kinds of edge issues? What do we do about how do we accommodate that promenade that comes all the way from Northwood Village? Should it go to the park? Should it go to the water? How does that impact the park design? The folks that are designing it, Herzog and DeMuron for Mr. Green, are not park designers, and they know how they'd like to see it happen, but the folks that we have are pretty good at what they do also. So I think that they would benefit by an interface of discussion and some input as to how they like to see things develop there. So it is a very specific but broad-brushed, literally a framework that will have to then go out and be exercised in front of the public. I think of it in many ways as a point of departure. When they come back, and the best example is the last time that we did a public presentation with the Jeff Green project. I mean, those guys showed up, and we had 200 people come and they said, well, here's some ideas. And, you know, these were just big white boxes without any articulation of the architecture or anything like that. But we think that on this kind of space, if we skinny up this and put a park around it, and here's a promenade, and here's how it works. And that's essentially what these folks are talking about. It gets them to a point of departure and a point where they can start talking to the public about these issues. And before they start talking to the public, they're going to talk to the other professionals and try and work it out among themselves to see how that would work. How much pushback am I going to get from Herzog and de Meuron if we say, no, your promenade should stop at the park or across the street and not come into the park, or that sort of thing. And I'm not going to try and put words in their mouths, but to me, it's just trying to get them started to talk among themselves as professionals and get them set up in a framework so then they can proceed and have meaningful conversations with the public and know what they're talking about, and not just be starting from square one, but actually have an agreement with the other folks that know that they'd be cooperative. What, for instance, if we think it's a great idea to not have the parking lot in the park, but what if Greens folks don't go along with it? Then it doesn't matter what the public thinks about it. We can't move it because there's no place to go with it. So it's things like that. I think it's a logical step, but believe me, I understand completely the abundance of caution that the commissioner is advocating for in not having us spend the money for grins. Another presentation that we pop out there and nobody likes it, so it goes away and we just spent $90,000 on it. Or if the proposal that they have is such a significant one that we choke on it as we did before and it goes nowhere again. But I would suggest to you, Commissioner Nearing in particular, you know, you made the remark the other day, and I thought it was a particularly insightful one. You made a remark the other day about, let's look back 17 years, and here's the Stull and Lee report, and they had a significant amount of suggestions for that neighborhood, and we should do a lot of things. I would suggest to you that the Curry Park project and the $20 to $25 million price tag that we're going to suggest is our upper limits of what we can spend to that. I would suggest that you find yourself tonight, or not tonight, because it's not in front of you tonight, but very soon you will be in the same position as that board was back there when Stull and Lee came in. They looked at the amount of work, and they looked at the significance of the project, and they looked at the expenditure, and they said, well, this looks real good, but we're going to have to think about it a while. And I think that's where you're going to find yourself with Curry Park. I will tell you that as your staff, that if you think that you're not going to find or be able to find or identify the funding to build a significant park on the order of the kinds of numbers that I'm talking to you about tonight, not the $40 to $60 million that they were advocating for, but if you don't think that you're going to be able to support the expenditure, wherever it comes from, of $20 to $25 million for Curry Park, then I would suggest to you that we not spend the $90,000 or the $1 million or the anything to develop a plan that we're just going to stick on a shelf somewhere. So in some ways, this is, and I said this to the mayor when we had an earlier meeting, that in every sense of the word, this is the train leaving the station bound for Curry Park. If you don't think we can get on the train or get off the train when it gets to the other end, I would suggest to you that we're wasting our time hiring these folks, and I'll just go back to them with a no harm, no foul. Sorry, we thought we meant it, but we really don't think we can afford this kind of an item right now. And then, you know, maybe we'll just cut the grass a little better out there, and everybody will play soccer on the fields. So I don't mean that to sound flip, but I am saying that this is the first step in that journey, and the journey ends there.
Part of the problem with that analogy is we don't know what the price of the ticket is on the train.
I've got a pretty good idea.
Well, that's
Mayor.
your idea. Now, the question is, and this is why we need a discussion, whether there's something other than that $25 million price tag that is doable. We haven't had that conversation. Yes, they've quoted you 40. You've come back with 25, but you know, we as the decision makers need to see what the $25 million buys us, and whether there's something less than that that is a step in the right direction. It maybe doesn't get us, to use your train analogy, it doesn't get us from here to New York, but maybe it gets us, you know, to Atlanta or something until we are ready to take the next step of the trip. I don't think there's been sufficient discussion about the funding and the cost issue of the ultimate design. Now, I'm in favor of taking this step, $90,000. $90,000 is $90,000. I don't poo-poo that, because I think it gives us additional data that we can look at as we are trying to make some of these more difficult decisions. If we find out, for instance, that Mr. Green doesn't want to allow us to park, doesn't want to move the parking lot, then we know that perhaps we aren't as far along in the discussion as possible. Listen, one of the things that people up north want is they want some action on Curry Park. I don't want to stop that now. And I don't think that by taking this action today, building the framework, that we have necessarily committed to the full $25 million. I think as we proceed along the line, we're going to have to continue to have conversations, and we need to see what our options are. If you're telling me the only option for improving Curry Park is a $25 million price tag, you gotta convince me of that. I think there must be something less than $25 million that we could do to show some significant improvement. But I'm not a park designer, but I would at least like to have that conversation. I think we in the dais need to have that conversation, but I'm not committed to taking that $25 million ride. And I don't think that's the only way to leave West Palm Beach to go to Curry Park is $25 million. At this point, I got to be convinced. Yes, Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. I think I just want to make a clarification here, because I think the mayor has some very valid points about what the end funding is for this. But more importantly today, the choices are not spend $90,000 or nothing. I don't understand why waiting 30 days to get a full approval so we can have that conversation about end costs, so we can have that conversation about design. The people of the North End and of the city have wanted action on Curry Park. We want an actionable plan. And my main issue with this here tonight is we reviewed this in agenda review, and the intent was to get community engagement and to make sure that we were working well with the neighbors. And tonight it shifted more towards making sure that a developer will be okay with our park plan. And I don't understand why the community is not first. I don't understand why we don't go to them and make sure these are things that they want to see. The community has been very, very leery of plans that are coming in because they've been shown plans before that they haven't had input in, and I think we owe it to our citizens to put them number one and first.
Commissioner Neering.
Yeah, I just, having been on this commission and gone through this process, I know how much time we spent, how much time I spent asking these same questions. And so for me, the way it's landing is this is the logical next step. That's why I can't wrap my arms around separating it, because I feel like I've been, at least through this process, as a part of the genesis of it. So for me, this was always the logical next step. But I appreciate and agree. Let's be clear. I agree, community first. But you got to call a spade as well. And so it's not the city who's taking this. I mean, we have to play fair. I mean, we're in the sandbox with other folks. And so for us, you deal now or you deal later. I mean, but again, I go back to it is a framework, and I think it informs us. It gives us more information. Maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Ward. I think it's pretty clear, no matter how we vote on this tonight, you leave here with the understanding that, we need some options, and that this is definitely not a $40 million project. It may not be a $25 million project. Where are we along that continuum? But again, I just want to be transparent. the way it's landing for me is because I feel like I've been on this train. I don't want to use that. I feel like
How much did you pay for your ticket?
yeah, right. Just because I've been in this process, I've been in those meetings. I was when we chose this particular company. I heard the public comment. And it just feels like the logical next step in this process, and so that's why I continue to be supportive of moving it forward.
I don't see this as eliminating the possibility for community input. I think there's going to be ample opportunity before we get to something that is finalized for the community to be involved. This, I think, is just a step to provide, and I think the use of the term framework is appropriate, to provide a framework for further discussions and to allow the community to deal and weigh in on proposals that are viable. Because again, if things don't go well with our other partner in the sandbox, we may have to switch directions in order to solicit the community input. So I don't see this as an either or, like if we do this, that means the community won't be able to weigh in. To me, this is just laying the groundwork, the framework, if you will, for further conversations and how do you build that skeleton that the community will weigh in on at some point. Yes, Commissioner Riles.
Mr. Ward, I think from what I'm reading here, and I wasn't on the dais at the time, that in order for the folks we're trying to retain tonight to speak with the other partner, because of the cone of silence, we have to enter into this, or an agreement has to be entered into before that can happen.
Mayor, Commissioner, that's the way that I interpret the regulation, yes. Now, I will say that the lawyer is telling me that I may not be completely accurate in that, but the way that I've read and interpreted and the way that I've seen it, applied in the past, that seems to be the case to me. So in the abundance of caution, that's how I interpret it, yes, sir.
Okay, well, irrespective of that, and they're not going to talk to our other partner for free.
No.
All right. So in order for them to talk, before anything can ever be presented to the community, they need to talk and see if we're on the same page, if we're in the same atmosphere.
Yes, sir.
All right.
I can tell you that we've had a few conversations between these folks and the Herzog and Muron folk in Switzerland. Several conversations. I've been again, in the abundance of caution, I've had them making phone calls to me and not to each other. So they will say something to me. I'm on the line. They're talking to me. They're not talking to the other folks.
The other person is eavesdropping.
Yes,
That's slick.
pretty much. But just trying to make sure that we don't go over that line.
I got it.
All right, any further questions, comments? I will entertain a motion.
I have another comment.
Yes.
Mayor. Well, I disagree that not moving forward on this is saying that we're putting the budget limit on what we may or may not spend in the future. So, because I would like to see a bigger picture, I'd like to have a better understanding of what we're moving towards. Doesn't mean that in the future, if what's presented and we're able to find the budget, that I wouldn't be in favor of that. So, I think that 30 days is not a long time to ask. And it seemed like when I asked you, is that a possibility? Would that be detrimental to the relationship? That it didn't seem like it would be.
By the way, 30 days is not a guarantee that you'll get it wrapped up, right? It's possible those negotiations go on longer.
Mayor, Commissioners, we've essentially got the contract is pretty well written. All I have to do is the scope of services, exactly what they're going to do, what we're going to pay them, and part of that is part and parcel. Part of what they're going to do needs to be aiming toward a budgeted project. In other words, they want to know how big they can go, what is their number, and I have in earlier conversations with them, and I'm sorry that everybody hasn't had the privilege of listening to those conversations, but I've been very clear with them that I thought, in my estimation, and I haven't heard anything to contradict that, but I think that the number that I have been using with these folks is our outer limit of this project, I think. But I'd like to get some advice on that if it's not the case, and I know their reaction to that. So, no, it's doable in 30 days. Like I said, the contract, the skeleton is already framed out. All the boilerplate is there. It's just a matter of finishing the scope up.
Well, therein lies the rub, because of what you're suggesting is, in order to finalize that contract, we need to give them a sense as to how large of a project we want to have. We're not prepared to go there yet.
And now you
because
find...
I'm not convinced, and you know, at some point you're going to have to talk to my fellow members on the dais, that we're signing on to. I'm not signing on to that $25 million now, because I have no idea where it's going to come from. So I need to understand what my options are. And if you're saying that to finalize the contract, we need to give them a number or a scope, that ain't I don't see that happening in the next 30 days, because we haven't really sat down as a body to see what our options are.
Mayor, therein you find my dilemma, which is why I'm trying to do this interim step.
All right, well, I'll support the interim step, but if the thinking is we don't do the interim step and in 30 days we're going to have the final contract, that is not going to happen, I don't anticipate. Yes?
Mr. Ward, did I understand you to say that if we're not prepared to approve a $20 or $25 million project, that we shouldn't move forward with this? That's what they want to work on, is a $20 to $25 million project, and if that's not the direction we're going, then why are we even entertaining this step? I want to make sure, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did I understand that correctly?
Mayor, Commissioner, I don't want to be punching above my weight here. They want to give us a contract, and the contract has to be based on what our needs and wants are. We were fairly loose in this description when we went out for the RFQ, which is what we did before, because all we were looking for were the qualifications and the ability to do a fabulous project. And I think the way we defined it without looking at it was a quote, quote, world-class park, which is, I think there are probably 100 ways to define a world-class park, but we have certainly attracted to this process several very significant landscape and park designers that are capable of giving us a world-class park. So now we are beyond the point of being lightly descriptive, and we have to get very specific, and I have to tell them specifically, this is what we want. And some of this can be done in phases. Best example is we thought that it might be a good location perhaps for a marina. Perhaps the community would be interested in that. That can certainly be done as another phase by a third party even. That could be a public-private partnership. That could be no expense to us whatsoever, or who knows what that could be. The same thing's true of a fabulous waterfront restaurant. We thought that that might be an appropriate thing for that site also. And again, that could be done through a public-private partnership, a lease of the land, and someone else could physically develop that. But if we're going to do that, they're going to have to carve out spots to suggest for that. Here we've designated the restaurant site, and here we've decided that we want a beach, and here we've decided we want whatever these things are. So I can't tell them how to design it or even what to design, but I have to give them some indication as to the nature of the park. And that only happens one of two ways. If I am prescriptive in the description of the assets, or if I refer to it by a budget. So I got to give you a budget, or I got to tell you what to do, and then you tell me how much it costs. If I just give you the asset list, then who knows what that number is going to come back. So I have to give them some inkling of the kind of assets that we want to see, but I also have to rein them in, as I have already seen, because their first proposal to us was almost what I thought we were going to spend in the park, $4.6 million for a design fee. I said, heck, that's a pretty nice park budget. But no, you know, so I know what I'm dealing with here with them and their expectations, and I think we have to be fairly prescriptive in our contract language that we give back to them. Or at the end of the day, you will not be happy with what we get, I think.
The other side of the equation is what we as a body are willing to pay.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
And so that is the variable that you need to have in order to complete this equation. And that's a conversation that we have not had, that we as a body need to have, armed with data from our finance people as to what is doable. Again, I don't want to go out to the public, and listen, the term world-class park, that sounds lovely, but I don't want to go out to the public articulating a pie in the sky. We've done this before in the history of the city, pie in the sky ideas, when we do not have a way of paying for those. I think it's a recipe for disaster. And so as we consider projects, whether it's Corey Park or any other project in our city, I want to make sure we have a firm grasp as to what's doable. So if we need to tone down that or trim down that $25 million number, so be it, and we'll see what they come back with. And if they don't want to even consider making a proposal or design based upon those reduced numbers, then, you know, we will have to confront that reality when we confront that reality. But again, it is 7:15. We've got a narrower proposal before us, and I just want to see if there's a motion so that we can all get out of here and go home. So, yes.
Just one quick question.
No, take your time.
Is that conversation that you're talking about, that money conversation, you know, essential to take place prior to us ordering this framework to take place? You know, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to vote on this, whether the conversation should be occurring before the framework, or we do the framework so that we can have the conversation.
I see, as I see it, I'm just one vote. We can move ahead with the framework, because what is so essential to the framework is what some of our other partners out there are going to be, what they're going to do. And so as we are thinking about what's doable, what we can pay for, we need to have a realistic sense as to what, you know, the co-owners or the owners of land adjacent to us, what they're going to do and what they are willing to do with us and collaborate with us. So to me, that's a conversation that I'm willing to pay $90,000, $80,000 for, so that we can at least develop a sense as to what's doable as we try to figure out how to play with another in the sandbox. But I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Even before those results can come back, we should start the conversation as to how much money we want to invest in Curry Park, so that Mr. Ward can continue his negotiations. So I don't see the two as necessarily being, we could do one, we could do both. We could go down parallel paths. I think because we can have them getting that data as to what Jeff Green is going to work with us on, his designers, architects, et cetera, while at the same time start discussing internally, putting aside what the park looks like, how are we going to pay for it, and what can we pay for?
Mayor,
that's just where I see it, yes.
one question for Mr. Ward. You put up the scope of work, and as you can tell, my main crux in this is community engagement. Is there the possibility that you have 2 trips planned out? Could we do 1 community engagement during that trip?
Yes, ma'am.
We'd have to change the contract. It says they won't have any, as currently provided, it says there's no community outreach.
So for me, a good compromise on this. I want to move forward with Curry Park. I too was on the dais when we did this process. If we can get a community engagement as part of this framework, I can support this to move forward tonight, knowing that we have this conversation. So I think if we can come to that consensus, what I want to do is not prioritize our neighbors over our citizens. Our neighbors are important. We want to make sure that everything is going to be together. But if we can get it so that we have both those pieces of input, and it's a base start, understanding we're not getting detailed in, but that we can have weigh-in from both sides, and that way we don't have to have a starting point. That's something I can support moving forward tonight.
Mayor, Commissioner, I believe we can deliver that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I think you did right.
Well, I think I'm the one that's supposed to be asking for any other comments. That's okay. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
And if you would, when you do your motion, include whether or not you want that additional provision brought up by Commissioner Schoaf to be reflected in the contract that's signed.
Okay, I move to approve Resolution 19-37 with the amendment that there will be one community engagement forum as part of the scope of work.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Item 4, Resolution 19-34F recognizes the delivery of proceeds from the sale of West Palm Beach Community Redevelopment Agency Tax Increment Revenue Bond Series 2019 and authorizes the appropriation thereof, refunds the CRA 2006A bond, and funds the reserve for bond cash requirements for the 2019 CCCRA bond. Okay, who's presenting on this?
I have no presentation on this, Mayor. This is merely you're accepting the proceeds of the 2019 bond, and it illustrates the uses as illustrated in the bond document. So you've advocated for going out for it. We have issued them, and now we're ready to accept the funds.
Quick question for you, Mr. Ward, based upon some meetings I had recently. Is the Banyan Park garage in here, Banyan Street garage in here anywhere?
No, sir, it is not.
All right. How's that project being funded?
Mayor, staff has been examining how we might move forward with that project as a P3 partnership.
Okay.
And it's my intention to have a presentation done by the industry. There's an industry organization that is very familiar with these P3s. I was going to have them come and do a workshop for this board,
Okay.
explaining to you the requirements of the P3, and if you are comfortable with that delivery method for a project. I have two parties presently, at least two parties, that are interested in pursuing the Banyan Garage as a P3 if you are happy with that delivery method.
Okay, so that's a separate conversation.
Yes,
That's fine. Any questions on this item? Comments on this item? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Mayor, I move to approve Resolution 19-34F.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Thank you all so much.